that's the kind of answer, like, what would you ideally call yourself? And, you know, I would ask if you could start with a serious answer, but if you think beyond that, then go for it. It might be quite funny. And we might have a little look back at some of those a bit later as well. In fact, actually, if you can you flip to that once we've got that, and just skip along to that question, Cameron? So this is what we've got in the room, mixture of sort of designers and product people, cool. And then the next one, be interested to see what comes up in the list. If you flip to the next one, that's cool. Oops. If you just do, yeah, that's it. System tinkerer, I like that one, that's interesting. Design tinkerer, is that same person. Professional plate spinner, that's brilliant, love it. So these are a little bit more characterful. I think they're quite nice, actually. The manager explains to people that people and their experience matter, love it. Bringer of success, that's good. Who wouldn't want a bringer of success? I think that might be a good new tagline for me. So some nice things in there. If we flip back, feel free to add more if you want. That one is cute, I love it. So one caveat, and I was just tweeting today, and I was worrying about this talk more than actually doing it. I do a lot of worrying and procrastination in my head. I still think it's work, but it unfortunately doesn't always manifest itself in stuff. And you know, the design room, we should be making things. Sometimes I think about this, and actually, I've been thinking a lot about how a lot of my work could translate more directly to product management, beyond the designers that I often talk to about this work. But I think today's the first time I've actually put it into one of my frameworks as an example, so you get an exclusive little test of that. So it'd be great to get any feedback on that. But I think, you know, with some of the things I'm going to talk about today, I think only a few of them are really very designer specific. I think a lot of them will relate to people who associate with being a product manager, product owner, product lead, all those types of jobs too. And possibly even, you know, a slightly lower percentage would be appropriate for anyone in tech or humanity generally, maybe. So I hope this is valuable as stuff that could help you as a human, as well as a designer, a product person, or whatever you might call yourself, system tinkerer. Because I think at the heart of it, I like a little bit of alliteration. There's a few more things we could add. But a lot of the time, you know, I observe in myself and with the people that I work with a degree of conflict. People often in coaching coming to me with a conflict with their manager or someone, a peer, who they're having troubles with. But they're also having like confidence issues as well. Confidence issues, you know, this notion of the imposter syndrome that everyone will always talk about. Maybe there's a higher relation to it in things like product and design for various reasons. And then ultimately connection as well, like how you connect to the products you create, the people around you, and all those things. And I think the thing is with this, with all of these, there's the interesting thing for me is the conflict you can have within yourself. And that sits at a lot of the confidence issues that you can have. And the confidence in yourself helps you to potentially interact with others. And I think that's a little bit at the core of what I'm going to talk about, because knowing and being comfortable with who you really are can help you interact with other people, because you're less like trying to perform and trying to kind of own more stuff. And I think that helps, especially in the context of what Product and Niche is about how teams can work together more and collaborate. I think that's a really important part. People know what part they can play and where they work together and where they might do something slightly outside, and to just be more comfortable in themselves, it makes that connection with the team much better. That's my belief anyway. So I think the conflict, confidence, connection applies to self and with others. I won't labour this too much, but you know, this is the typical stuff that a lot of us may have seen or read about this tension between some of these roles and titles. And it was interesting when I was looking for things as well. Like, you know, I was just trying to summarise some of the things that come up in my conversations around this. And it's horrible. And I'm actually in a situation now where I'm kind of like tussling with this myself. And there's a lot of kind of things about this notion of people like land grabbing, taking research, or doing this, or, you know, we're misaligned as a team, got different philosophies. You know, my product manager's playing a Red Figma, and it's like going, oh, but they're not doing the strategy, or like the designer's trying to do all the strategy. It's like, that's my role. All of this stuff is fighting. And people saying about, like, you know, the bottlenecks and how long things take. And a lot of this comes a bit because I think that a lot of the time, especially at events, especially large-scale events, and in writing, and I think partly due to the culture of
performance that happens when someone gets on stage is they want to be articulate, they want to be a very clear advocate, and often that means saying things in somewhat a dogmatic way. And that can put other people down and gets confusing. So I quite like this, and it's almost 10 years ago, so these conversations go on and on and on with Melissa Perry, who's a very design-sensitive product person, I'm sure you all know. And she really was kind of advocating for less of like about the roles and more about like the skill distribution in a team. And I think that's more important, is what people are actually doing and how those skills get put across the team. I think underneath all of this is that people really kind of often tie, especially in their earlier years, it's definitely me as well, it's still me in fact, tie their identity to their job title, the tribes that they grew up with, or the tribes that they kind of believe with, bond with, and kind of to what's going on in the industry as well. And when those things are challenged, like has been happening in the past few years, it can shake them to the core. And I like these questions that Martin Neumeyer uses as a brand strategist, and he asks for brands, like who are you, what do you do, and why does it matter? Now you can ask them to yourself as well, and they can be quite tactical questions. You could ask it to kind of have what's my proposition for how I introduce myself. But actually if you go, well, who are you really? What do you really do? Or why does it matter really? You know, you go to deeper stuff. Why do you matter? It's quite existential. So it can be very, very light and very existential. And sometimes it's really hard to decode all of these parts. And I like to decode things because part of my work as a strategist is to take kind of fuzzy stuff and to try and give it form to help people to kind of connect to it. So this word has been used quite a bit. And I wonder whether, design products, especially in the last few years, and I think a lot of COVID stuff as well, a lot of stuff happening in the economy, layoffs and everything else, I wonder whether people are going through an identity crisis. So this next question, it's again anonymous. When I've done it in some environments, I get people to stand up and go through all these things. I'm curious, if you go to the Mentimeter, can you answer me this question? And the questions are around, hopefully, if we move on to the next question, you got that. It should be things like, are you going through an identity crisis now? Have you been through one? Do you think you are going to go through one? Or do you think you won't go through one? And sometimes I say you might be deluded if that's the case. Or you're just like, everyone, let's learn from these people. Is that working, that one? I'm curious, could we flick and see what's coming on? And if you flick on the left and right. Okay, so yeah, people been through one before, in one now, expect to go through, don't really know what it is, where I will. And I think that last question is an important one. That last answer is an important one, which I'll come to. Let's flick back, and if you want to add some more, I think that's always useful. If you, flip back to the slides. Thank you. Cool. So interesting thing, I was presenting at a conference when I was, I think the second time I was talking about this identity crisis, and this person before me, she was talking about the fact that identities are fluid, and actually that's the thing that makes us human. Whereas other kind of animals often kind of retain their identity, they're not really changing that much, they're growing into things, but they don't really change their identity, and it's what makes us human is that we can change, and we are changing. And so I think it's a little bit more than this, but I wonder whether some points, especially in this kind of cliched midlife, or when something kind of significant happens, are you actually going through a chrysalis? You're going through a stage where sometimes you'll go through this pain, you go into this darkness and then come out as a beautiful butterfly or something else. Maybe even a chameleon, you're adapting to the environment. But sometimes that change can be really slow. It's not an obvious thing. It's not something that just happens overnight, as much as people will sell you workshops or sessions or coaching or therapy, whatever, to try and help you with that. So, with regard to the industry and what's going on and where we are and whatever's going on with AI, where it's a really interesting space, scary, exciting, all those things. I've got to believe, and I have to believe as a designer and as a coach, I believe in this thing called hope. And hope is really about, it's not just naive optimism, it's just a belief that things can be better. And I believe that humans can make themselves better and can make better things. And I think that, to inform that, and as by doing that, I think that we can better understand and better improve ourselves And ultimately, I believe as a coach as well, that I want to have people that are happier and more comfortable with who they are. I think it helps them make better things for the world and make better humans for the world too. Now, the interesting thing with all of this is that, I believe that every designer, product manager, and human is different. Sometimes, like snowflakes, designers can have fragile egos. Lots of humans can have fragile egos. But every one of us is unique and different. And yet, like a common thing, and these are mostly sort of designer terms, but we're kind of compelled to always try and put someone in a box and give them a title. And then assume that we're all in the same sort of trajectory up. Maybe there's a path for some sort of principle where you're a bit more hands-on, but there's always this kind of up and up and up. And the people when they're first starting out, like say in design, or I don't know, there's so many people come from product from so many different angles, but the same with user experience. You kind of didn't come to kind of like be this necessarily super manager necessarily. You came because you were really interested in what was going on and solving these problems. And you get to a point where you're kind of reliant on the money, the status, the power, you keep on going up. And often I'm coaching people like at the top of this ladder and they're like going, oh, they've fallen off or something's happened. Something bad's happened. And they're kind of going, well, why am I here? And we might probe like, well, what do you really want? And then you get trapped by like, I've got my mortgage, got this, I've got to stay here, I've got people in school, all this kind of stuff. And we always assume to some extent, and we know it's not true as well, that we've put people on the same career paths. And yet every one of us has come from a different place. And we kind of assume that suddenly when there's this kind of thing that we're going to be roughly in the same direction. It makes sense that we try to kind of simplify the complexity and the nuance of these paths and these different kind of different roles and ladders that people could be on. They're useful, they're seductive, they can be limiting to us, and they can make us feel uncomfortable and unhappy with ourselves because we're all different. So how can you shape the futures you want? By maybe shaping yourself more intentionally. And this is really what a lot of my work is about. I'm going to talk to you about this notion of what these shaping tools are, the little kind of imperfect tools that help you with this. I'm going to talk through a model, it's a simplified sort of layers of self model, which is kind of houses these different tools, and talk about 4 powers that help you reflect and plan and change direction and emerge. And I want to emphasize that even, myself, I in my coaching, I don't always use my shaping tools. I might use 1 or 2 if the need comes up. But there's so many different things you can do to understand yourself. You could do yoga or avoid doing yoga because your partner is a yoga teacher. Sorry. Or you could do breath work. You could take psychedelics. You could do personality tests. All of these things can somehow give you a bit of more understanding of yourself and give you a bit more centering into something so you don't feel so alone. So the shape and design tools are just like one thing that I have created that kind of helps. And the particular angle on them is that they're kind of like, I would say, like a self-strategy tool framework thing. And they're always sort of like meant to be, although you've got one side, the more complex one is the least engaging visual framework. They help people engage with something that's rather complex and nuanced and can be quite heavy. By making them a little bit more inviting and simplified. And I make the point about them being imperfect because if you try and put like a taxonomy in front of most designers, they'll criticize it and say, well, what about this? And this should be that and all that. So I just say, just use this and then we can debate it later. So this is an example of like some of the visual frameworks. There's a whole kind of pattern of these different kind of visual family that I've created with my friend Eva Lotta. And essentially, one of the ways I think about it is it's like a kaleidoscope. It's like many different lenses to look at yourself through. And they each give you a different kind of viewpoint, a different kind of perspective on yourself. And when I run workshops, which is where I first started doing them after doing them with my team, they kind of help to kind of engage people. And this is an example, I might play with Skittles, but this notion of kind of drawing with this stuff on paper where the input is the output helps to engage people in something that can be quite heavy. If you go to coaching and therapy, it'll be mostly dialogue. These things help to kind of bridge and kind of a little bit more accessible to get to some of the early stages of self-understanding. They basically kind of go on this premise, which I kind of borrowed from John Wilshire, which is very much a kind of designerly product kind of premise, is show the thing like a prototype, and then you can change the thing, externalize the thinking, put it in, give it some form, and then you can understand it and tweak it and move it. And this time you're the thing. You're this complex assembly of contradictory issues. That's a human for you. Online, if you've got the link, and in front of you, you'll have these pieces of paper. It doesn't quite like this. You've got two different versions of this, which I'll talk to you later. And on the other side is a meta framework, which I'm going to be talking to. And because a lot of this is quite complex, we may have to take a little bit of a break at some point. The idea is that as we go along, I would encourage you to try and fill it in, just to kind of engage with it. And don't try and worry about it being completely right. You can always go away, download a copy, do it again. But I'm going to talk about these different layers. And what I'm going to invite you to do is to, kind of mark like with a dot for maybe where you are currently. And then you can add like an arrow or some other marking. It's your marking, so you do what you want, of where you want to shift that. And you don't have to do the shifting bit yet if you want, but just kind of like, just get a sense of, I'm about here when we go through these. I'm going to explain each of these layers. And very basic video, if it works, of filling it in. I mean, this is a pointless video. Maybe it helps. Anyway, there we go. We don't need that. So the layers. So this layers is like a kind of, I think I was doing a talk around tectonic shifts in the industry or something. That was the theme of this conference. I was like, oh God, that sounds like BS. And I was like, metaphors. I love a metaphor. So I was like thinking of something about planetary layers here. And we'll come on to shearing layers, pace layers, if you're familiar with that later. But I was thinking about it, it's like there's this notion of the environment, the stuff that surrounds you, the industry, communities, society, and other stuff, that is kind of a little bit more gassy, and it's kind of like changing all the time, right, around you. And then if you imagine yourself as this kind of like planet, there's different aspects of you and your skills. There's the tangible aspects of your skill set, which is more the technical stuff. This is the stuff that most people talk about most of the time. The first day, I'm going to try, this bit can be long, and it might be a bit indulgent, self-indulgent, but there's reasons for it. And this is all about how like the environment shapes you and how you can then ultimately shape that environment. Okay, so we're all part of a system in different ways. One for the system tinkerer in you. And so, like I say, there's a mixture of things around the community. So things like this. There's society, the country you live in, the politics you're around, various organisations, the different people around you, your family, your friends, colleagues, etc. So I'm going to take a little bit of a personal story, and it should factor in. So. These are my parents. This is from a while ago. And my father's like Turkish Cypriot. I met my mum in Cyprus. He then fled Cyprus and national service, so he couldn't get back. And I kind of like grew up, this is an early version of me, like through that melding, I took on this name, my surname, Mesut. A skin tone that allows me to tan when it's sunny and go paler and look a bit iller in the winter. A little bit of a Mediterranean temperament that's come out in my early years. Possibly some genetics that may have affected aspects like my potential diabetes or ADHD and all those things. So those parts of the environment are kind of like more tangible and kind of more like physical world, biological, right? The funny thing is with my name, I didn't know any Turkish up until like about a year and a half ago. And when I was on a call with my dad, he goes, well, you know, Mesut means happy, don't you? I was like, no, what the fuck? I was like, well, what does Jason mean? And Jason's a little bit more Greek, and it's got negative connotations of healer apparently, but it still means healer. So I was like, am I the healer of happy? Now, I think it's kind of quite ironic because I've dealt with mental health issues a lot of my time. I've been going through like a 7 or 8 year identity crisis, I believe. I've had a lot of therapy, having a lot of coaching myself. And I think it's part of the reason why I want to help others is because I've suffered myself. So it's kind of ironic that I have this name, I think. But I'm the happy healer, or the healer of happy. And I'm a middle child, which might be part of which factors in potentially to my neediness, my quietness, my introversion at times. The Mesut men can be quite argumentative. They can shout out, and I'm quite recessive, but I'm also at times can be a smart ass and can call people out. We were talking about that earlier. And I don't like injustices. Maybe because I felt my own injustices being the middle child and being ignored. I grew up in a place called Norwich, east of England, and I got sent, I won a scholarship to go to a private school full of white middle class kids, and I was of a different demographic with browner skin and kind of experienced mild racist abuse. I didn't really fit in lots of different ways. So I rebelled and I went to this place called Chapperfield Gardens when I was like a teenager. it's a similar age to my son, and did a lot of things that you shouldn't know about yet, that kind of helped me connect with a whole bunch of different groups of people. There was all sorts of underage drinking, drugs going on. There was all the different sort of grungers and indie kids at that time and ravers. And I was like at a boys' school and there was girls and stuff. And all these people came together. And I had to kind of connect to them. There were different versions of me that I had to be in those environments. And this will factor in later. I had to adapt to my environments. I eventually kind of got into music and raving and drum and bass and other things. It's been 30 years since LTJ Bookham's amazing Essential Mix with MC Conrad last week, a reference to that. And then I eventually had to sort my stuff out and go to university. And in my school, they wanted you to be a doctor, a lawyer, maybe an engineer. And so I tried to pick like a design course, some sort of creative course that had an engineering qualification, BEng or something. And then I dropped down from industrial design engineering to industrial design. And it wasn't a very typical designer place. It was a very much learn lots of different things and learn how to learn. It was very good, but it was quite high pressure. But I did find design through that process, through prototyping and making. Eventually, after kind of having a placement where I did interior design painting for some friends, I realized I had to get proper placement, and I got a job at Yale.com, early days of online web, 98, 99, and had to cut my teeth through website stuff. But when I left university, I spent a lot of money on records and turntables, and rather than kind of go into a creative design agency, because I had academic qualifications or strong academically, I could go into a management consultancy, which was a pretty horrible place for a designer, creative type. And I learned a lot about argumentation, selling, more commercial sides of things, manipulation, all sorts of things, how to get expenses, get a big tummy as well through lots of estate. And a lot of the time I was swimming against the tide. Similar, I kind of in the early days of internet in the UK, like there was this company called Flow Interactive, is now Foolproof. They were kind of like a leader in user research and user experience design, and I learned to rewire my brain for understanding users, and ever since then I always do qualitative research. I worked in a bunch of design agencies that felt a bit more like my crowd, and I started to fit in some of those environments. And worked and built teams myself, and that was like one of the highlights of my time. We partied, we had fun, and then there was a point in design leadership when I couldn't hang out with all my team in the same way. And eventually, I got sick of just hiring all the time, and I wanted to prove that I could do the work. And I went to a product strategy consultancy called Plan and learned a bit more about how to do strategy work and get paid for it rather than give it away for free in a pitch. And then I eventually set up Resonant about 10 years ago, where I did more consulting, more independently, working with teams, and then kind of found coaching. And then like towards the end of last year, had like a real, like I was doing quite well financially until like my, coaching career kind of like, I wanted to do more coaching and that didn't pay as much as my consulting. And my business really badly crashed a bit last year, and I'm just in recovery now. So amongst all the other uncertainty a lot of people are feeling, I had to experience that. And also, like, I had to experience a lot of professional loneliness. So this is a lot about my environment, but it does help shape you. So as you're thinking about this, think about your environment and think about what has shaped you and what your impact is. I'm part of IXA London. This is the European local leaders group. Every year we hang out in Berlin and catch up and talk about that stuff. And it's a really good community. And I'm part of a lot of different communities, different types of environments that help me not feel alone. The different types of tribes show different parts of me, almost like going to Chapelfield Gardens and kind of having these different groups of people that I could connect to. And sometimes I'm more with one group than the other, and sometimes I pull away. I recently just left Group of Humans after 7 years, and I might put more time in another community, for example, or focus on a different thing. All of these inputs help shape me. So all of these different things can help to kind of inform who you are, what you do, and why you matter. But they can also kind of like feed who you are so that you can create things for that environment around you. So over the years, in the early days, I was like one of the first like UX portfolio gurus or something. Nowadays, I'm more infamous for my coaching, or nowadays my Friday thanks maybe, the shaping tools, and it's just going to talk about. So how has your environment shaped you? So use the sheets if you can, and let's see if we can get on to that. How do you shape it? How comfortable are you with your environment? So just sit with that for a few minutes while I... So with the technical layers, this is more tangible stuff that people will often talk about. It's like the fields of practice, the things that are kind of like, lots of literature has been written about process, theory, dogma, maybe specific technical skills or methods. And this is all about sort of the capabilities that are specific to your profession, typically, your particular job title maybe. And often when we think about these, in the design world, you probably have something similar in terms of product managers, the notion of things like T-shaped designers and things. So this idea of horizontal skills where you kind of have like a sort of high level of certain skills and some deeper levels of others. And but then Jared Spall took it a bit further and said it's more like a broken comb. You've got different levels of depth across multiple things of this, which is kind of more in relation to the way I think about it. And Liz Bacon, who I was working with on a recent article about some of the history of some of these mappings, kind of did one in the early days, kind of mapping it onto what she called the UX sundial. And in a piece that we co-wrote, we talked about sort of like this 24-year dance of decoding UX as it was, all these different models and frameworks that we have borrowed from and built on and all those things. And she actually works as a product manager now, and we were discussing about what we might do in that space. The one I first started using was adapted from an adaptive path model, and it had this kind of like this weird kind of quadrant thing. Warren kind of put it into a quadrant and said, well, what if we kind of got people to draw shapes on this kind of framework? Draw a shape in terms of how confident or competent you feel in each of these different discipline areas, and then kind of add arrows and maybe annotate these. So you've each got a copy on the other side of like a product management one, which is new, and a UX specific practice one. I'll go through very, very quickly on these, but like, don't overthink it. It's something that I used to do in an interview with people. Sometimes I'll draw my shape. And the idea is that it's kind of a weird thing. You're kind of putting an amorphous object in a kind of fixed square. But you've got things like service design, visual UI design. This is more from the UX practice map, product strategy, interaction design, information architecture, content design, qualitative research, and quantitative research. And then this is something I've been debating. I've been thinking about all the things, because a lot of people who end up in product management, they've come from lots of different backgrounds. That like happened in UX as well. So I think there's a bit of sharing. So maybe sometimes the quantitative research is sometimes a little bit more data analysis, analytics, and maybe even data science. There's product strategy can sometimes be a core thing that you would expect a product manager to do some level of, dependent on their level and role. A lot of product managers come from a project management perspective as well, and that's really helpful for some of the prioritization, the planning. Some come from business analysis, and that can be commercial strategy to kind of more systems analysis work. Some a bit more brand and marketing bent, thinking about products from a brand and marketing perspective. Many will come from software engineering, and some will come from like the user experience and user-centered design. So I'm kind of curious, like it might be interesting for no matter which one you associate more with to do both and see where you sit. So just spend a few minutes on this and just try and draw a shape that represents, like how confident you feel in each of those different areas. And sometimes it can help just to kind of like do some initial dots to kind of like do it. That's assuming that this is like, really guru status or something in each of these areas. And I can ask the room, and maybe if there's anyone online who's got a question, I'll answer if there's any. I'm wondering what kind of common fields of product management practice do you think are missing from that list? And what I use as a term as field of practice is a really hard one. It's like a discipline. It's almost like it could exist in its own right, or did once. And there's like lots of books about that particular thing. So like data science is like a thing. It could be, there used to be like a specific role. Software engineering is a whole huge field. And all of those things. So it's not like, sometimes when people do the technical things at first, and I'd say off at a lower level, there's things that put like prototyping or user interviews. And I go, well, that's a very low level of detail. What's the practice, the field of practice, the discipline that sits above that? Because there could be multiple methods and tools and other things that could change more frequently. But what's the kind of core thing? So there's a bit of a duplicate. And then, you know, I do versions of this where they are a little bit more like a radial chart where you can put numbers on them and those numbers can have meaning. This takes a little bit longer. We won't do that today. And you can have a kind of clearer taxonomy. And you can fill these out. You've got a different relationship when you're working at this level versus that kind of sketchy, amorphous blob shaping that I showed you earlier. This is a thing from Interaction 19 Seattle where we just kind of created a new framework and infamous Brenda Laurel, and we got people to kind of put it up in this kind of booth and stuff. And if you were to kind of really scrutinize these, there's probably, my guess is that none of them are the same. And the typical thing when I do a workshop, it's very rare that any one of the tools is the same, let alone multiple tools. So it's just trying to emphasize in some ways, even just the point of saying, oh yeah, we are all different, right? Through this lens. And when you look through multiple lenses, we're definitely different. And then, you know, some of you would have seen these memes and stuff, and I was like thinking, oh, right, you know, and I used to ask this sometimes in interviews, are you more UX or UI? And they go, what do you mean by that? You know, and we have a discussion. So I created this thing, which I call like UX dichotomies, and I actually use this kind of framework for lots of different things. So kind of putting things on a spectrum where the idea is that you can take things like UX versus UI, research versus design, strategy versus delivery, quant versus qual, and you kind of put a dot for where your center of gravity is, where you're most comfortable, or where you like spend the most time, and then the brackets indicate like how deep into those other areas could you go, so it's kind of indicating almost like a range, and then your center of gravity, and you could kind of then add arrows to say, well, I want to kind of extend my range or shift my center of gravity, be more UI or be more strategy. And so it's a really interesting kind of like, it's not like a brain tease, but just doing this exercise, I used to hate it because it just felt so weird, but actually people really loved doing it because it's like it's again a more qualitative way of thinking about yourself. And I've done things with like leadership and research as well on these ones. And I actually use it in strategy as well, normal strategy work. So that's technical skills. So again, looking at your meta sheet, I'm wondering like how comfortable are you with your technical capabilities? So the next layer is a really interesting one to me. It's what I call foundational skills. Now these skills are typically the ones which I would say are they kind of sit underneath the technical skills and they're transferable, often transferable between a role or a typical like job title, and especially in the kind of the fields of sort of product management versus UX and product design. There's a lot of transferability of underlying thinking, communication skills, so that when you kind of were to move into a new role or career, or even outside of product management, or product tech or whatever, you could take those skills with you. You wouldn't necessarily need to take interaction design or those sorts of stuff, but you could take like other things. And these sometimes I talk about them in terms of the sort of things you might learn at school, but then you kind of forget about. And then later on in life, you go, oh, I actually want to be able to communicate clearer, or I want to learn how to read better and speed read and all those things. And so it's an interesting one. Or you might go, oh, I want to get better at critical thinking, this kind of really abstract concept, or curiosity or something. And so this is like a kind of particular chart that I've got that kind of maps some of these things. And you'll see things like listening exists in this kind of understanding area, as well as like active listening being in communicating. Because active listening is about sort of, is about sort of communicating to others that you're listening as well. Other things are a little bit more about how you think, like thinking through abstractions and scoping, prioritizing, and those things. No matter whether you're a project manager, product manager, or a user experience designer, that could be helpful for being a parent or kind of doing, setting up a business. So a lot of these things are kind of, they they inform and they support those technical skills. And one of the popular ones, especially in kind of design, that I like to advocate, and I'm not as good as I used to be at all at this, is things like sketching, specifically sketching interfaces, obviously, but sketching for visual thinking. And this could be anything, even to the degree of like getting up on a whiteboard. You don't have to be really good at like line work to be able to communicate an idea. Sometimes the talking and the movement is enough, but sometimes thinking visually helps you get out of a trap. So sometimes switching tools. So I kind of encourage things like visual thinking, and there'll be other things around communications that everyone will talk about, as well as maybe like different ways in which you kind of think and operate, like how curious are you, how proactive are you, how reflective are you. Do you communicate with emotion, reason, or logic? Or like, how decisive are you? You know, I'm naturally very indecisive, but I wouldn't be very successful if I didn't make decisions at some point. So the foundational skills, they kind of, you know, they underpin all this stuff. So I asked the question, like, how comfortable are you with your foundational skills? Because one of the things is they're kind of quite hard to define. They're kind of like fairly invisible, so they're not as tangible as the technical stuff. And as we go deeper down this model, that's like a kind of common characteristic. So have a look at your charts and kind of maybe have a think about how comfortable you are with these skills. This next layer is about sort of relational. Is my audio coming through? Yeah, cool, excellent. So this is really how the skills that enable you to interact with others. So I often think about this in terms of like the personas. Like I talked to you about that sort of upbringing and going to the Chapfield Gardens and having to be different people in these different environments. Some people really associate with that they start to kind of think, well, who am I really? Because I'm me only in relation to other people. Like, who am I by myself? And they have this existential thing. So a lot of people have that challenge, especially me, in fact. And so I might give myself all these labels, like I'm a coach, designer, consultant, leader, but I also have all these other labels. Like, these are all different personas, and it's almost like I was talking with someone else. It's like, you know, because I'm into music and DJ stuff, it's almost like kind of like different levels of bass, mid, treble, or graphic equalizers, different versions of me, different things that I'm going to turn up or suppress, depending on what I'm doing. Sometimes I'll be cheekier, sometimes I'll be clearer, sometimes I'll be really messy, sometimes I'll be fun. Very rare these days. I am naturally, and always people kind of find it funny, we were talking about public speaking, I'm naturally shy and introverted, and people don't think that because I'm here doing this sort of thing, but it's like, no, I had to work through that. And the interesting thing is I did a photo shoot for kind of some of my workshops, uncomfortable one. I had photos before, I think you used one of the older photos, which was like me in a yellow jacket in like South Bank by myself. Yeah, it was like, you know, and people go, oh, it's the Yellow Jacket Man. That's like, but it wasn't really me. It wasn't really me. It was like really quite cold kind of thing. And the photographer at the time, I wanted to kind of take photos of me interacting with people, but couldn't get the light and all this kind of stuff. So I'm like there by myself in the South Bank. It's like, this isn't what I do, and this isn't how I am. And so what was really beautiful about this photographer, she was like a wedding photographer, and she did, you know, portrait shots. She's more reportage. So she was trying to capture me in these lots of different moments. So sometimes there was me being like I am now. Sometimes there was me being pensive. Stroking my beard. Sometimes I was like one-on-one with someone. Sometimes I was doing it. And it was just like, this is how I am in these different things. I was like, see me. So we were talking about Pablo Stanley recently, just earlier. He was presenting at UX Brighton. And there was a time last year when I just like got obsessed about taking photographs of the speakers, because I was like, when you're a speaker, you don't get good photographs of yourself. You'll get the ones that, you know, the photographer thinks are good. But I just try and get as many as possible and give them to the people and go, right, you pick your ones, because you'll be like all these poses and like, oh, you saw me, that was cool. And it's like a little gift. And I think there's something in that. So how can you see yourself in these different situations? Right. So Mentimeter, and we can't switch as easily, so I'll come back to this. But I'm curious to ask you, I asked this question, this is the first time doing this presentation, I'm not going to ask the question about what makes the important qualities of a modern day designer. I want to know about what are the most important qualities of a modern day product manager. So if you go to the Menti, like, what are the qualities, not necessarily technical skills, but what are the qualities of a product manager? And you can answer while I'm going to the next bit. Oh God, I've got to come back to this. Yeah, it's 20 years ago. Yeah, 20 years ago, around the same time as I was working and using that quadrant framework that Warren introduced to me. I had this opportunity to kind of do my first conference submission for Euro IA, it was at the time. It was for a poster, and it was asked this question about kind of, it was called Creating the Perfect Experience Architect. And it was like a bit tongue-in-cheek. We used to call ourselves experience architects. But I was asking these questions like, what makes a good designer, essentially? I was asking colleagues, peers, and clients and stuff, and getting lots of different perspectives. And it was super interesting. When I kind of went through the list and I prioritized it, there wasn't much about the technical skills. It was a mixture of foundational skills, qualities, the team working stuff, the thinking styles, team player, empathy, not just for the users, but for the business and other colleagues. Pragmatism and delivery focus. Maybe it's a bit more technical, I suppose, but the people relationship skills, all of these things, the solution driven, is kind of a little bit designly, I suppose. Conceptual thinking, this is so hard to explain and communicate and teach, but it's thinking about like things like metaphor and how you can kind of bring lots of features and ideas into a kind of a unifying concept. Attention to detail. Some people are really good at it. Some people struggle. Listening skills. And I kind of like, at the time, this is when I first started creating these radial charts, kind of we did some kind of peer review on some different people in the team. And obviously there were different shapes. It's the same point I'd been making all the way. Everyone was always different. And we did a famous sort of usability guru at the time. We didn't know him, but we just assumed and rated him really low on some empathetic skills, people skills. And then I kind of created this sort of like visual metaphors that were kind of representing some of these things. So being very good listener and having the ears, being able to be a great communicator, having the balanced brain between kind of analytical, creative thinking, sort of the passion, the heart of gold, standing up for your ideas when you know they're right, strong backbone. It's a bit different to resilience, which often comes up, but it's almost like, no, I'm confident, I know this stuff. Safe hands, and it gets tenuous about delivery. And then one of my favorites, the bifocal eye. So the challenge between having that anal attention to detail and find that those little nuances, the judgment that makes the big differences, and that bigger picture thinking, the systems thinking. And the interesting thing is, like, the point around this whole poster when we created it, and big poster, it got used at recruitment events for a long, long time. And I still reference it 20 years on. I think most of it holds up, and I want to review it again, but it's about time. But what was interesting is that there was never obviously a perfect experience architect. The point is what's right for your team? What's the right mix? And again, back to that point about product management and design, it's like going, well, it's like shared. Like, you don't need everyone to be the same in that mix. You want to complement, and there's going to be some overlap. But if you're comfortable with yourself, you can work better together. And if you can understand and read these things, then you can work with it and know that maybe it's just a trait that you can't move past. So I use this one a lot, similar idea, you fill it in, and there's no point, you get the idea, you've done that. But this is an example, and it's probably, I don't know, maybe up to almost 2000. Whenever I ask that Menti meet, and this is the first time I haven't for designers, you'll see like empathy is always there, nearly always there. When you dig into the data and actually kind of analyze it, it's not the biggest thing. And that makes me so happy. And there's lots of reasons that I won't go into too much, but I think empathy gets overused because actually it's kind of like it's anti-neurodiverse. If you're thinking about emotional empathy, some people just can't have emotional empathy. They might have cognitive empathy. But I was really pleased to see things like creativity and collaboration and curiosity, because curiosity, in my eyes, curiosity can feed collaboration, creativity, and even cognitive empathy as well. And so just doing that analysis, I'm sure that a lot of these things will be factors for product managers too. This one is like one of my favorite tools, not just for design leaders. It was created for initially when I was working with Martina Hodges-Shell when I got rejected for a role that I thought I was perfect for, and I was like, well, what do they want? So I kind of tried to think, what are the different aspects of design leadership that are not about the craft and the solution design? And I think a lot of these translate to lots of different types of leadership, and even people without leader roles. Vision and strategy, doing community things, external community, managing your team, trying to get good quality, developing the practice, collaborating with other stakeholders, kind of building capability. Someone mentioned design thinking, like kind of teaching other people how to do certain things, selling, advocacy, promoting the offers. And the interesting one about this, and through various people, actually one person I was coaching kind of did some builds on this. Initially, I kind of said, well, use one line blue for how much time relatively you're spending in each of these areas. And then another one for like how confident you feel doing those things. And another one for how much you enjoy those things. And then look at the gaps. Are you spending lots of time doing something you hate? That's quite often. Maybe someone will enjoy that thing and isn't spending any time doing it. How can the rest of your team be supporting these things? Where could you delegate? Where could you lean into some of those things? And often there's a correlation between confidence and enjoyment. Not always, but if that's the case, you're enjoying something you are confident in, it's like going, is that something from your past you want to drop? You want to move on to something else that you enjoy, but you're not so confident in. So I find that one really, really interesting, just to kind of think about your role as a leader and how you support others. Other things, kind of thinking about like this notion of a system and like who you're serving, where you provided value. It could be like for your own self, your direct team, like a wider community of practice, like products, practice, immediate colleagues, the business itself, customers, users. And I get people to kind of distribute a bunch of points, like where are they directing that value? And what's the chain, the linkage between that value? Just to kind of think about, well, who are you serving? Who are you working with? Who matters to you? And then kind of using an empathy spectrum, which I need to kind of update a bit, but using those same kind of stakeholder groups at different levels. Kind of thinking, how much do you know about what they need and what you might be able to provide them? How much do you just like don't care, indifferent? How much are you like, oh, poor them, they just don't get it. Right, you know, how much do I hear that? Or are you feeling what they feel, or do you know what they feel? Like maybe that emotional empathy versus the cognitive empathy. And then this idea of compassion. So compassion, lots of different definitions of compassion, but typically it's when you're driven to act based on the appreciation of someone else. So you're compelled to do something about it. So not just sitting with it, you're going to act upon it. And so where are you with all these different stakeholders, and where do you want to shift it? And I think that's really important, especially if you're thinking about others. Like some people maybe you don't care about, that's fine. Acknowledge it, move on. Some deeper things, kind of sort of Johari window-esque, this idea that there might be how you see yourself versus how others see you. So there's the deeper, like who you really are. Like I don't like using the term authentic self, but like this is what it should be. It's like who you are deep down, really. How you're perceived in behavior in different situations for your different personas, who you hope to be, or maybe who others hope you to be. So who are you really? How do you behave? What do you want? And then others might be, I had a conversation with someone, is it about what they need or what do they expect of you to be? How do they perceive your behavior? And as a result of how they perceive your behavior and who they want you to be, like who do they think you are? And I once had a breakdown, and I get most upset and most anxious when there's a sort of a delta between their impression of who they think I am and what I think I am. It's like they've misread me, and it really upsets me. They've assumed a certain value system that is the opposite of me, and it's like, well, what am I doing that's projecting that? So this is stuff where it starts getting quite deep, right? You know, different ways to look at this. Again, to the point, this foundational relational stuff is transferable to whatever career you do. Parenting as well as a career, working in, you know, shop, entrepreneur, whatever it is, it could be transferable in different ways beyond design and product. So go back to your sheets. Like, I'm curious, like, how comfortable are you with how you interact with others in these different contexts? One of the things I was discussing about the leadership stuff is that often, you know, I found myself in a leadership role that didn't really feel natural to me, but I didn't know I was being pulled in lots of different ways. And I was talking about this notion of these personas of self, right? And if you imagine there was this version of like your true you, which is quite hard to know, takes a lot of work. And then you kind of like step away and you have this other version of you and this other version of you. And it's kind of like there's certain versions of you that are so far away from who you really are. If you imagine it like elastic, what can happen is it just takes up a lot of energy and anxiety to be that person. And if that elastic keeps on stretching for a long period of times, it can eventually snap. That's where burnout, breakdown happens. And I think you're putting a lot of energy into something, you're not getting much back. Maybe it's not right for you. But we don't know. Sometimes we're pulled along by other people, or serving other people, what they expect of us, or what we think we should be. And it's because we don't really know who we should be. Which is where we come back to the harder bit, the hardest bit of all. The identity, like what really matters. What do you do? Who are you? What do you do? Why does it matter? Why do you matter? Why are you here? That's the existential question. What are you here for? Who are you really? And this gets deeper. There's different ways to probe. This is very much a lot of the work of coaching and therapy. I love this quote to death. I always use it. Alexander Den Heyer's book, I can't remember what the book's called, it's amazing. It's full of great quotes. This notion you often feel tired, not because you've done too much, but because you've done too little of what sparks a light in you. So a lot of the work comes into kind of trying to probe, like, what sparks light in you, what kind of energizes you, rather than what brings you down. What kind of, when are you in full flow? When are you really you, when you feel right? And so you can do things like this, like a customer journey map of your life and career, kind of tracking the highs and the lows and mapping it to, maybe the leadership levels. And there's always a little bit of a recency bias to the fidelity, the resolution of this stuff. But often, especially with leaders I work with, it gets much more volatile later on. Because they're dealing with humans all the time, and humans are volatile, and it's hard. Versus the early types of career, you're kind of swept along, you're not so concerned, you're just dealing with technical skill type stuff. Another very popular coaching tool, I mentioned it earlier, this notion, the wheel of life. It's the idea that you can have a preset list, or you could kind of come up with things. And I tend to split it between work and life, because for me, work is a big part of my identity. But you kind of think about, well, what really matters to you, and you map it, and then you ask the question, how satisfied are you with that aspect of your life or work? And you see in this example, not very example. What does that mean? Do I need to spend a bit more time in those areas? And sometimes you can look at this in terms of actually, I could just spend a little more time and I'd get a lot more back. And so just seeing your life in this way can help you get a bit of perspective of where you're spending your time and energy. So very, very powerful tool. Another one is like an old kind of brand kind of tool, and you probably use versions of this and, other things. Take some adjectives, qualities or values, and try and pick the top ones that map to you, or create your own. And then what I tend to do is just get people to pick 5 from this set list, and then kind of give it a weighting, and it should all add up to 100. So you're giving kind of emphasis, and then you can use those as ways to communicate, your values, your principles. One of the things I also do is a projection exercise. This is a little bit harder to do when I work in an organization. Managers are always a bit worried about this one. Is you do a leaving card when you leave. And if you take those stakeholders that you mapped earlier and those people, and you can map your enemies, your friends, the people you're serving, your team, and then try to imagine what they would say about you, ideally, when you left. What is the impact you had on them? And how were you? What's your behavior? How were you in doing that? So kind of it projects you into a different state, especially if you're someone like me that's very focused, become me amongst other people. You're kind of looking at yourself through other lenses in a more future desired state. And so when I first did my coaching, I did this and put it into a framework. I won't talk about the ultimate vision was really weak. I had a bunch of initiatives, but I had these kind of outcomes, these things that I wanted to achieve, like happy family, joy to many, built strong community, progress practice, and help people be amazing individuals. And I kind of combined some of these different values to kind of say things like driven but fun, productively provocative, because I was just a dick sometimes, and how can you be provocative in a kinder, more supportive way. So the last level. How comfortable are you with who you really are? And this is a deeper question, I get that. Do you know? How has it changed over time? How could you know? And it's much more of an emergent thing. It's not something you can just do, snap of the finger in a workshop. Sometimes you look into it and you come back to it every now and again, and it changes. You change. So a bunch of different levels. It's gone from that environment and the things that shape you and you shape, through the technical level, the tangible, to the foundation levels that start to be transferable, things that you can kind of more learn, the relational stuff that's about you in relation to others, and then ultimately who you are, who you want to be. We've got an animation. There we go. Slick. So with all of these layers, what's interesting, and I mentioned this before, you can look at them like pace and shearing layers if you're familiar with this model, often used in tech and design, in houses. There's this notion of the pace of certain types of levels in this. They move at different frequencies. So if you imagine the house, the foundations don't change that frequently, but the furniture within does. Fashion moves more quickly than maybe nature does. So in a similar way, the further out you are in this model, the faster the change, the technical skills, the specific methods maybe, that the rhetoric in the environment. The deeper in, it's harder to understand and it's less comfortable and it's more lonely, but it's a slower moving thing. Often a lot of coaching and therapy work starts to talk about that self as being more that inner child, going right back to when, before you were polluted by the external world, almost like the, young kid. But my belief is that although we try to think about design and product as a very functional thing, I think it's a very human thing as well. And I believe that everything we do, because we're all different, affects what we create. Like every startup that was a particular thing is probably kind of driven by, well, some of the major ones, driven by someone's chip on their shoulder or something that resonated for them. And the way it gets articulated and executed through the team has a little bit of all of us in it. So and I believe that some of that stuff from the deeper side affects that. But in order to kind of understand it, we have to do a lot of reflection and self-discovery. And so, we were talking about therapy and coaching in one of the things. Therapy often takes a long time and goes right back to base. Coaching will always be trying to move you forwards and help you understand through positive movement. It's very similar to product and design in that way. Make a thing, to try something out and learn from it. But it does take its time. So a rhetorical question here, you don't have to answer this. Which layers of yourself are you most connected to and actively investing? So this is kind of one of the reasons to do this exercise and to go through these layers. And I'll skip to these ones and I'll just come onto the home straight. Okay. So we're all different. These models help to frame our perspectives. You've seen a bunch of them. They're like a kaleidoscope, like many lenses to look at yourselves through. And I haven't shown them all of them. When I do these workshops, they help, like originally I kind of set it up so that they could engage designers specifically and gather data to create some sort of universal model. I gave up on that idea, but often I'm using it to kind of help develop more stronger competency frameworks, and often from the team upwards. So it's kind of like a bottom up method, using some of my tools just to prompt and prime people, because some of that work can take ages. And I've done it in lots of different places around the world, talked about it in different places, and it's really interesting to see different things. This is in Tokyo last year. They're really engaged. This is Miami, very hot, sweaty, 160 people. That was not pleasant. And sometimes it gets to the point you kind of work with these skittles and you kind of have a little play and you start to try and represent yourself with the different categories, and also like how confident you feel in the area, but also where you want to grow and where you can maybe help others. And in a team environment, that helps you to kind of create some sort of supply and demand map so people can mentor and support each other. And to remind you, all of this stuff allows you, it's a lot to do. It's taking this kind of like ephemeral, this very kind of subtle, invisible stuff and kind of try to give it some form, show it, so then you can kind of go, oh, is that right? Is that right? Do I want to change it? Show the thing, change the thing. So we get things up on the wall, get people to have a look around and have a discussion about what they see and observe through these things where everyone's different. And it's kind of, like I say, it's performative. It's quite hard to analyze, but you can analyze it to some extent, knowing that it doesn't have the dimension. It doesn't cater for the dimension of humility because people, are not objectively measuring themselves. And you can do things on Miro, Mural, and analyze that way. And, I don't know, it was 7 or 8 years ago, I can't remember the date, 2018, 7 years ago, I did a whole Medium series that's got most of these tools in earlier forms, explains each of them, all publicly available. I was, up until the end of last year, was working on a book that I have a copy of. I've given up on the book for the moment. I was working with Eva Lotta Lamb on that, some nice things in there, but it was organized around these a different framework around modes and stuff, and you would have these different tools. So I may do something with these tools at some point. There's a bunch of different frameworks, some which weren't quite complete. And try and associate with different contexts. So you're starting out your career, you're at crossroads, different things to help frame maybe what are the sort of sequences you could do for someone so they could self-serve. And I think that's the hardest thing, is trying to kind of help people self-serve. It's not as easy. So my current thinking is that I might try and take some of those contexts and make more context-specific ones for people who are losing the love. There's quite a lot of people in this space at the moment. So all of these things kind of help strengthen what I would call the 4 powers. The power of perspective. In Japanese, there's this term keski, which is like the perspective or the vista you only have once you've been through struggle. Once you've climbed through the top of the mountain and looked down, it's very different to getting a helicopter up there. And I think that's important to have experience. And having that perspective enables you to have possibilities and to kind of focus those possibilities. When you know what those possibilities are, maybe you can determine, well, what do you go after? What is your pursuit? And maybe through that process, you can kind of develop what that purpose is. But I think there's this kind of cycle of this stuff, like it's an iterative loop. It's like this perspective inspires the possibilities clarify the pursuits fuel the perspective, and all the while, you know, it's fueling the purpose, and the perspective is informing that. The purpose is focusing the possibilities down, and it motivates the pursuits. So my belief in purpose, and often people try and get your purpose out in a workshop, you could do that, but then you might want to come back to it after you've done the change. So different ways to look at that. So I've talked about these seductive and useful boxes, ladders, and paths. I've talked about the unique shapes, the many lenses, the changing layers. I talked about those 4 powers, and hopefully I've emphasised to you there's no like quick fixes. These things, all these different things can help to a degree, but often meaningful transformation can be helped by the tools, but it can take a lot of time, different frequencies of change. And it's often better with people around you to do that. And so these are some of the people, like mixture of coaches, therapists, friends, partners that have helped me through some of this stuff alongside the tools. So I hope you find people who can help you as well. Because I'm a fan of drum and bass, I'm a fan of this poem. I like this, is about this notion that each new hour holds new chances, a new beginning. The horizon leans forwards, offering you space to place new steps to change. So it's a case of like learning what's going on. There's always an opportunity to do something different and to kind of find your place in the world. And a reminder that identities are fluid. It's what makes us human. How can we make hope possible rather than despair that's often around us inevitable? Because I have hope that things can get better and that we can make things better and we can make better things. And some of that can be informed by our better understanding of self. And so that's why I do what I do. So have a think about this. You know, there's lots of rhetorical questions. You've done some of this stuff. Maybe you can take it away. You can look at my stuff online. There's lots of free stuff. Have a think about, well, what layers of self will you invest in and how? If you want to follow me and get onto my newsletter and all this is my selly bit, you know, I do these shaping workshops, sometimes for individuals, sometimes for teams. I do a very, very cheap monthly reflection thing where I experiment with new tools and we get people to kind of reflect on their month. I do one-on-one team coaching as well, and I do a bunch of other community stuff because communities are cool, like yours. So thank you very much. I am now done. and I hope you found it valuable. You're not asleep. That's good.
I love the drum bass references. That's a tune.
Yeah.
That was amazing. Thanks so much for that. I personally absolutely love it. I think it feels so right for me at the moment because I feel like I'm going through a little bit of a change where I'm a little bit unsure about, you know, what's next. And so it feels very poignant for me. And I think knowing that, you know, there's other people out there that have been through it, and there are tools out there that you can use similar to this to kind of guide through that is amazing. So yeah, thank you. We've got some questions. It's a Q&A bit now. So if anyone has anyone would like to ask any questions, if everyone's...
You can catch me one-on-one outside of the microphones as well later if you need to. But
yes,
any perspective, anything emerged for you, anything that was poignant or anything that could help me? Yeah.
It's just for online.
Hi, online audience. I'm very shy. The question is, you talked about environment and you shared your story, and we all have our stories. But then there is also our goals as well. So you work on yourself in order to reach your goals. That's you.
Sure.
And then, but there is also an environment, and I think probably what I'm struggling with is how to shape those, because I felt like environment been shaping me all along, and I lost that. I had to build everything in a new environment now.
Okay.
And should I continue working on myself, knowing that I do need environment? What comes first? My question is probably what is first? Focusing Do you get the question?
Yeah, I mean, but I think it's so. Do you focus on yourself or do you focus on the
Yeah,
environment?
what's more important? Because maybe I need to find an environment first, and then that would shape me in the way I want to.
Yeah.
Or should I continue
Yes.
working on myself and then go find the environment
Yeah.
that's going to be good for me?
This is the thing that I want to be talking about more at the moment, and I haven't properly articulated it. And something that relates to more the teamwork, right? Because often there's a long answer to this, but there's a short answer maybe. But so when you do, I think part of the thing, and from a coaching and individual coaching perspective, you're working on yourself primarily, but there's often things about you having that conflict with someone, your boss, your manager, your career, that environment is toxic, right? And some people just say, leave that toxic environment. But to some extent, you are potentially complicit in that toxic environment. You may be finding it toxic when it isn't really. You're not addressing it. So often you might want to start with yourself and just really try to understand that. And some people might say, if you ask a friend or whatever, going, it's really hurting, you just get out. In this market at the moment, that's really hard, right? And it's a very privileged position to say. The other side of it is that, like if you know yourself, better, then and your team knows what it should be, and you know that you should be part of that team, and that team fits into that organization, and that organization has a part in the world that is really clear. If all of those things are aligned, then brilliant, right? It makes sense. When all strategic things are aligned, this company exists, the brand makes sense, it's got meaning and purpose in the world, the teams really kind of know their place, and individuals really know their place. Now imagine that perfect alignment. It's very rare. Right, it's really rare. If it did exist for any point in time, at any one point in time in the future, any one of those things can shift. So an individual, something happens to them, you go, no, I don't fit. And it disrupts that whole system, like in different ways. And it may be not overtly, or the environment changes. Like everyone goes, I don't know myself. Everything becomes bland, or someone saying like we're in a sea of sameness, and brands are so similar. They've lost themselves. When the brand isn't really clear what it's about, it makes it really hard to know, should I be part of this or not? And also, like when they're talking to people in Japan, like typically they stay in an organization most of their lives. And so the notion of ikigai that gets abused in the West, and they abuse the part which is around making money, because the Japanese don't include that in the model, because maybe Japanese have more of that ikigai outside of work, not necessarily within the work, because it's a different model. You get a salary man who wants to climb up and other things, but that's changing as well. But then when you're in a system where you're like, I'm just part of it, like it's less of you in it at that point. So I guess it depends on how much you want to put yourself into that work environment, and then work out what are those environments outside of work. So one of the problems with design, and I suffer from this, is I put so much of my creative energy and soul into the work, and you don't get it back most of the time, because people don't want all of that. It doesn't make sense. If everyone did that, it would be a nightmare. So it's I don't know if I'm answering, but it's complex, right? I would say it helps to start to how are you going to react to that system around you, and you can't easily change that system. It takes a long time to have an effect. I've been doing this for 15, 20 years, and I just hope bit by bit that, one person finds value in it, and then one time, they might tell me, oh, that was really helpful. Well, that's enough, maybe, but it's slow. These things, but you can do more work on yourself and how you react to what's around you. That's easier. It's not easy, but it's easier. Could be, yeah. Both. No, but it's a really interesting one. It's the hardest.
Thanks. Any more in the room? Any online?
Favorite load of people. Yeah, cool. Yeah.
How did you? I'm keen to understand how you sort of worked through, the different tools and methods that you created. How long did it take, and was that through just like lots of trial and error and talking to people and?
Truth is no. So one of the problems, it's one of the reasons, one of my excuses for not finishing the book is because the problem when it was a book versus those original Medium articles, the Medium had that affordance of like, you can just do something like sketch. It's a written sketch, right? And I liked that because I could just throw out what was on my mind at the time, and it's like rough and do that. When it becomes part of a book, or that even when we created this visual system around it, it looks more polished. People hold like this thing as like an object. It's like the business model canvas. It's like a kind of like a tool. It's like a real thing. That's like, this is the process. It's like, no, it's not. It's a bunch of boxes with words in. The process and practice is happening. It's just a prompt and a probe. So the problem is that I know that people are taking my work and going, this is the thing. Oh no, that's wrong. That's right. And I think that like it's frustrating for me because actually I like to just kind of my problem is I like to come up with new lenses all the time. So the coolest thing about doing the monthly R&D is I just go, right, what month is it? Well, where we are in the seasons. Okay, well, how can I make a twist on this? Now I've got like a pattern library of different visual canvases. What words can I put on them? So like June, all right. Okay, like, well, it's just a creative exercise. Like, oh, what is in your jug of June joy, right? And how are you going to fill your jug? And so it's like it's a similar method that other people use as a coaching question, but I've made a jug that I use a noun project illustration, and then said, right, what do you put in your jug, and what is this cocktail of joy juice that you have? And it's like, it's fun, right? And but all it is just a way to get to the deeper stuff with more engaging things. So I like that part really, and I think that my work might get criticized for being too plentiful and inaccurate and kind of loose. And I'm cool with that. I think it makes sense. So I don't actually spend that much time. The only one I spent proper time on was the Experience Architect, because I did actually properly research that one. I have gathered stuff since with all those Mentimeter, it's 2,000 data points maybe. It's some data, so I could use that to kind of come up with a more robust model. But it's not me. I'm not the sort of person that will come up with like a new Myers-Briggs or other more rigorous personality test. I don't find those things interesting because it gives the illusion of rigor, and I'd rather just go, it's just a prop for conversation. So I don't actually spend that much time on it. I do. Well, I have been thinking about the product one for a long time, and I've been thinking about the fact that it would be more lucrative for me to do these workshops with product managers than designers, unfortunately. And I think it's actually more complex because there's a few more kind of fields coming into product manager roles. So I have been thinking about that one for a long time. But the problem with that space is there's a lot more product managers that have done their own models and stuff, and I have no respect in that world at this moment in time. Sorry, long answer. Not that much time.
All right. Any more in the room?
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, let's talk about purpose. Big topic. And I was trying to formulate my question here, and I'm not quite sure. I mean, feel free to talk about purpose in any regard, but I think my concrete question would be, because my issue with purpose, my personal problem with purpose has not so much been about finding it at work or outside of work, but really defining it, sort of like some sort of long-term vision. What is my purpose? What really drives me? What gets me up in the morning? And the closest I could get to some sort of framework about finding it was the book Find Your Why, which was like a follow-up from Start With Why. The classic Simon Sinek book. So do you have any good frameworks or tools for sort of like diving into finding purpose, defining purpose?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of talked to some of them. Some of them are more uncovering the building blocks to get you closer to understanding what brings you up and down. So when you do the customer journey mapping thing, I get people to kind of summarize what energized you, what brought you up, and what pulled you down. And that starts to give clues of maybe what doesn't feel right for you. And that can change over time. So that's one input. The Wheel of Life is a kind of gives a little bit of sense of the things that you enjoy. You could ask a question of, I think sometimes people ask the question of like, if you understand that notion of flow, where there's a kind of the level of challenge and the level of enjoyment, and you get the right balance of that. And when you're in flow, apparently that's kind of like an indicator potentially that you're doing something that's purposeful. One thing that I learned from someone is that often purposes are often driven by a trauma or an inadequacy or a chip on your shoulder. So if I reflect on some of my purpose, if I relate it to this stuff, it relates to maybe not being seen as a, there's probably more to it, but not being seen as the middle child. And so that came up when I was having an ADHD diagnosis, because I had to answer questions when I was, 7 years old. My mum had to answer it, and my youngest brother was 7. It's like going, maybe I wasn't seen as much. And how does that feel? And it's like trauma. So maybe that's driving it. And at what point do you get over that and you go, actually, now I know that, I know what it is. But so I think it's a little bit of a feeling out thing. Sometimes you know it, and then it might feel right for then. That's why I say it's like it's a loop. You're going to come back to it, and you're going to get more clarity on what you think it is. So that kind of like strategy diagram thing that I had, I should go back to that, and really refine. I think most of it's about right. But I think it's a really complex thing, and I think I haven't actually read the book, but I've had a lot of the Simon Sinek stuff, and I get it, and he's very articulate. But I think it's a quite complex thing, really. So I don't have a clear, easy answer.
No, that's all right. It's your maybe a quick follow-up question.
Yeah.
If you, I'm not asking for this or that kind of answer, but you can either say okay, my purpose is to, make the world a better place in some sort of way, right? And I'm gonna find a job that helps me achieve that. So I'm gonna align my work environment. I'm gonna go and chase an employment situation where that aligns with my purpose. Or you might, like just said, the market's a bit tough, so you might not be able to do that. So instead, you go and define a purpose within your current workplace. So okay, well, at least I can make my colleagues happy. That's my purpose right now. I'm trying to align with that purpose with where I am right now. Is one way more suggestible, more better than the other, or
Well, I don't know. I think so, because one of the things is, again, how much energy or stock you put in it, because sometimes within the work environment, when things aren't going well, it doesn't necessarily fit, and you're kind of hanging in there because you're worried about the market and everything else. You put a lot of energy into it, you might not get that energy back, and that's where burnout exists. More energy in, less out, doesn't work out well for you. So you might need other energizers outside. You might need to care less, just do the basics, let go of stuff. Designers in particular are bad at letting go of quality in certain areas. And to be strategic, you have to kind of work out where you invest, dial up the innovation, dial up the quality, copy someone else, right? And the same with maybe in any kind of product stuff. You've got to work out what's the right distribution of that energy. And I think that it might be for different times. Some people will go, right, actually, my attention has to be on my kids for this period of time. And then you're going, I've lost myself as a result of that. Lots of parents will feel that. And then they go, right, now they're kind of left home, they're doing all this, what am I about now? And they'll come back and they'll try and figure it out. And so it shifts over time. And I think if you were to reduce your simple question again, just in case I didn't answer, is it this or that? I don't know. I think it's a conversation with yourself or whatever. But there's certain people in an organization going to be apathetic, and I think I'm respectful of that. Maybe makes sense. I wish I don't want to be that person, but I wish I was a little bit more apathetic. Wish I cared a little bit less about the work thing. I would probably be more content, and I could do more fun things outside.
Cool, thank you.
Great.
Cool.
Last question.
Coming on the question of purpose, and so what do you say? Because you said earlier when we met, you said most of the time you work with people who probably have crashed out, or people who are on the journey. Sometimes you like to find them before they crash out. Now, what would your advice be to people who are on the journey of matching the purpose with what they're doing? Should they hang on? Like she mentioned something around a toxic environment. It might be a mismatch of purpose and what is going on. It might not be aligned. So, but sometimes too, reality is, what's the economy? Are you going to walk on water? So what usually do you recommend when you have people who find themselves in that loop?
Yeah, I think there's an interesting, it was one thing I was exploring in the monthly things, is this notion of springs and struts. If you're familiar with old school user interface stuff, like this notion of like, you've got a fixed constraint versus something it's got wiggle room. Often we take a certain variable in our life as a fixed strut, like, that we have to live in a certain place, that we have to stick in that thing for the school or keep that house. And actually, it doesn't serve us. Ultimately, we might need more freedom in our lives and we need more flexibility. So often it's just, so one of the things that I'd be trying to figure out is like going, to some extent, you'd ask the question, like, what do you really want? You might ask that. Because if you sit with what do you really want, that's a deep question, right? But it's like going, well, which things of those are blocking you from that thing you really want? And they go, this, I've got this. And go, well, how much of them are real issues, really? And if you decode that, you can kind of uncover the things where there's a little bit more wiggle room. And it might not be, I think the thing is, that there's a thing about time horizons. If there really isn't much wiggle room now, if you project 5, 10, 15 years into the future, there's likely to be more. So what can you do now to support you doing that thing more in the future? Because if you don't start doing it, you'll never get there. So I think it's like, what is it? Someone said that the best time to plant an oak tree or sow the seed for an oak tree is yesterday. When's the next best day? Today. It's like one of those things. Like if you can start saying that thing, you can just sow the seeds. And one of the things I often talk about is this notion of antenna up and antenna in. So this notion of like feeling into more and understanding more yourself and what you want and what you know. And once you know that, you can go, right, I'm interested in AI, I'm interested in gardening, I'm interested in this. You start kind of getting it, and then more passively, stuff comes to you. Like you're just more aware of it. Your social media goes down that way, everything. Like in the world, you just notice things. But by understanding what it is you want, you get an understanding of how to collect all that in the future. And it accretes and builds over time. You can force it, you can push it at times and ramp it up. But just sometimes when you're in an environment like, if you can pull yourself away a little bit emotionally, it's like going, what can I get out of this role that will help me for the future? That also serves my current organization, but serves my future. How could I kind of weave in a bit of experimentation on this, like learn this particular skill because I want it in my portfolio or when I go to the next job interview? And it's just trying to just invest in yourself more incrementally rather than like make that kind of quite extreme shift. Now, some people making that shift really, really valuable, but that could be your marriage. It could be anything. The job is like quite extreme. So, you might want to feel those things out before you make a big move like that. So, good complex question.
Thanks so much. Let's have another round of applause for Jason, please.
Thank you for your participation. Your energy.
Amazing. Thank you, Jason. I think we've got a few minutes left, maybe. So yeah, do pick Jason's brains a little bit more. I'm not sure how long you can stay around for.
I can stay a bit.
A few
minutes. Till you close.
Awesome. All right. Thank you. Thank you so much again. So thanks, everyone. Thanks to Silicon Brighton again. Thanks to Rap for having us. And thanks for all of you for coming out. Really appreciate it. And yeah, hope to see you next time.
Yeah, we look forward to seeing you next time. Yeah. We're in London in September again.
We are, yes.
Just a reminder, we've got our conference in October. Please grab tickets.
Which was the last slide, but we'll bring that up in a minute. But yeah, do check it out, summit.productunleashed.co.uk. Yeah, and we'll see you soon.